You are listening to the serialized audiobook podcast for Blood of the Stars, an epic fantasy novel written by Karyne Norton, read by Paeter Frandsen and Karyne Norton. If you can't wait to listen to the whole audiobook, or if you want a signed physical copy, go to karynnorton.com/shop to get the lowest cost by buying direct. You can also find the audiobook on Audible, Barnes & Noble, and other standard retailers. Please enjoy the next installment of Blood of the Stars by Karyne Norton. Chapter 61. Hush, Felk. Eliana ran her hand over the Winix's forehead. Wrinkles bunched his skin, making him more gray and dusky than silver. He closed his eyes with a moan and curled up on her bedroll. The last time she'd watched his rebirth, it hadn't seemed so painful. "Mama," he whispered. He hadn't called her that for weeks, and the word sounded strange on his elderly lips. This could have been his 5th life cycle, or it could have been his 100th. Tomorrow I won't know you." She shook her head, even though his eyes stayed closed. "Tomorrow you meet me again." She gripped his hand tight in hers, speaking a confidence she didn't feel. "You remember my last life. You remember how I hurt you?" The lines around his eyes deepened. She hesitated, unwilling to lie. "I remember, but that was a Winix who'd been mistreated. You won't be like that again, not as long as you stay with us." "But if I am, you'll kill me. Silmar will kill me. Anyone here would kill me before they let me hurt you." His racking cough came out in spasms, and she passed him a cup of water. Most of it spilled down his cheek. "I could never kill you, Felk," she whispered. His eyes opened a crack, their blue still as brilliant as they'd been his first day. "You must. I don't want to hurt you." She hushed him again, bending forward to reassure him, but a commotion at the edge of camp startled her. She turned and squinted, taking in the welcome sight of Karyne atop a horse. "Karyne's here. He'll be able to give you memories in the morning." Felk let out a sigh, then went so still she thought he might already be gone. But it was too soon, and his chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. She rose to greet Karyne, who had dismounted and was already surrounded by Holm, Silmar, Velden, and Lukai. His concerned frown and weary eyes seemed to spread through the group as she worked her way to his side. Silmar was right. He wouldn't hold Eliana's gaze, and her stomach tightened. "My parents have a warrant out for Eliana's arrest." The pain in his voice sent a jolt through her. "They know I'm a Windren." She kept her voice even, but he'd known too, and he didn't hold it against her. Karyne nodded, still looking everywhere but at her. "They've also aligned themselves with Mavis." Lukai inhaled sharply, placing a hand on her arm as if to keep her from getting any closer to the bearer of bad news. "That doesn't make any sense." Silmar's frown bunched his scars. Eliana's mind raced. This changed things. It would change things for Silmar's plans. And it would have to change things for Karyne, wouldn't it? Did you tell them about Islara? Velden asked. The skin around Karyne's mouth grew tight. They already knew. Aeliana studied Karyne. The croak of frogs and chirrup of crickets filled the night air, but she waited for him to look at her. When he finally did, his expression was raw. His shame laid bare between them. I'm sorry, she said. He scoffed. What are you sorry for? My parents, I'm sorry they've put you in such a terrible position. He swallowed hard and looked away. I'm sorry they've disappointed you. His nod was stiff, and she held back the rest of her words, worried she was misreading the situation, worried she'd read it far too right. He'd have to make a clean break from his family or the recreants. He couldn't fight against Mavis without fighting against his family. She wanted to reach out and squeeze his hand, to ask him about Enla, to find something he could hold on to after such a deep cut. But Iris's words about him interfering with her bond still rang in her ears, and Lukai's hand still held her arm. I vowed to protect you long before I knew who you were. Karyne said the words like they were an apology. At first, I thought your identity changed things, but it doesn't. Not really. You can't have it both ways, she whispered, but the words felt loud. I know. He stood a little taller, turning to face Silmar and Velden, even as his eyes flicked back to Aeliana. I've come here to commit treason. I may not have a fleet, but I'm offering to take you all to the Northern Sea, not as the Prince of LNS, but as the captain of Starspeed. Everyone knows they're one in the same, Silmar said, but he stroked his beard thoughtfully. True. Karyne frowned. I'll probably have to change my ship's name. Maybe Paeter. On the plus side, I can grow a beard and get a tattoo. Find a good pirate name. Have any suggestions? His lip quirked up in his familiar smirk, and Aeliana couldn't help smiling back. Maybe Karyne the Vain or Braggart Brownbeard? He put a hand to his chest in mock pain. You wound me. He took in everyone behind her, and something shifted in his eyes. He hesitated before turning to Silmar. I understand if you don't want the added complication of a prince committing treason. Silmar's shoulders lifted. Kendallin can sift your soul again. He moved away to find her. Aeliana stepped closer to Karyne. What will you accomplish by going against your family? By joining our cause? What do you want from all this? She couldn't help the curious questions, but she hoped he couldn't sense her eagerness. The same thing I've always wanted. This time, his eyes bore into hers with confidence and a strange warmth she hadn't seen before. She tried remembering what he'd wanted, what Kendallin had seen when she'd sifted his soul the first time. Did he want to protect her? To find the Star Bridge? To go against Mavis? All those options meant his loyalties lay with them, but for some reason, she needed that distinction. For some reason, it mattered. Silmar returned with Kendallin, who stepped up to Karyne and held out her open palms. He sighed, then handed his horse's reins to Aeliana and placed his hands in Kendallin's, screwing up his face as if he were the one needing to sift through her soul instead of the other way around. Kendallen's eyebrows rose over her closed lids, and Eliana would have given anything to see what Kendallen glimpsed in Garen's soul. The moment stretched, and Kendallen stepped back, her gaze shooting between Garen and Eliana. "Well?" Silmar grunted, shifting his weight more heavily on his staff. "There's betrayal in his past that wasn't there before. It clouds his motives, but his desire hasn't changed. He wants to protect the people from Mavis, to find the Starbridge. He wants what's best, even if his parents don't." Silmar squinted, the scars of his face pulling in tight. "He can't be all that noble. Nothing's ever that simple." "Like I said, his motives are mixed." Kendallen glanced at Eliana, drawing Silmar's and Lukai's attention too. Eliana rubbed the fresh scabs and scars on her palms, unsure what to think of Kendallen's strange behavior. The woman remained as mysterious as the cuts that continued showing up on Eliana's skin. Cuts that made her wonder if she was doing blood magic while she slept. Ever since Durakin had been freed, she'd been too afraid to ask Silmar about it. "Besides, how can you refuse me? I still have a boat, and you are in need of a boat." Garen grinned at Silmar. The muscles in Silmar's face twitched as he debated their options, but clearly, this was the best one. "How soon can we leave?" the older man asked. Garen's smirk bloomed to a full smile. "If we stop for supplies in Brighton or Merrick, we could leave tomorrow afternoon. That will draw less suspicion anyway." Silmar nodded, turning back to camp to call out instructions. Kendallen left, and Lukai reluctantly followed, glancing over his shoulder at Eliana and Garen, who remained alone at the edge of camp with his horse. "What about Riverin and Marnock?" Eliana handed the reins back to Garen and stroked the horse's withers. Garen ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I think Riverin will come, but I doubt Marnock has had time to fully search for his roots." "And Enla?" Garen's smile faded. "She has to make her own choices, and I'm not sure they're the same as mine. Once my family realizes I'm gone, I won't be able to return. Not unless we've exposed Mavis. Even then, this could be unforgivable." Eliana bit her lip and turned away. It felt like too big of a risk for him to come. He didn't even know half of the risk because he didn't know about her blood. This moment alone wouldn't last long. Not with how little everyone trusted the prince. But she trusted him. She almost laughed at the strangeness of the thought. In fact, as rocky as their start had been, sometimes he seemed like the one she could trust the most to tell her the truth, especially if it would be something she didn't want to hear. He had no motives to get her to do what he wanted. She leaned against the horse, as if revealing her secret to the gelding instead of Garen. "Mavis has my blood," she whispered. "What?" Garen's face paled, his gaze darting to the others still walking away. "We're guessing she plans to brand me the same way she branded my mother." Eliana rushed on, unsure which details to spill before they lost their privacy. My power is strange, unwieldy. Even as Silmar trains me, it's too strong. They think it has to do with the way my guardians... with the... She closed her eyes, unable to finish. If she branded you, she could control that magic. His hushed voice held sorrow. Eliana nodded, still unwilling to look at him. I just thought you should know the risks before you get more involved. I'd hate for you to get all the way to the Valley of Kron just to discover it's not a risk you're willing to take on. Eliana? Lukai's call from up ahead broke the strained silence between Karyne and Eliana. Coming, she yelled back, taking a step toward her bondmate. Karyne stopped her by grabbing her hand, the warmth of his skin sending a trail of hope up her arm. Thank you, he said, for telling me. Her smile faltered when Felk's howl filled the air. Felk will be reborn tomorrow. His eyes lit up as he glanced around for the Winnicks. Can I see him? He's not doing well. Eliana bit her lip. It might be difficult to transport him, but I was hoping you could give him some memories after he's reborn, and not the ones of him attacking me. Karyne winced. I can probably come up with a few others. Make him feel like he's at home. Eliana slumped. That would make him the happiest Winnicks in all of Riston. You think he'll be the same in his new life? Karyne asked. Eliana opened her mouth, but her words were drowned out by voices in the distance. Karyne's hand tensed in hers. Run, he whispered, before shoving her away. Who? Please, go. He shoved again, and she tripped, catching herself on a mangrove root. Before she could get too far, Lukai's arms were around her, pulling her into a crouch. The occupants of the camp disappeared in a shimmering wave as Jasperus's face scrunched in concentration, and the voices became clearer as they called Karyne's name. I'm here, Karyne called, his voice miraculously dozens of feet away, beyond a cluster of mangrove trees. Still, it was too close. How long could Jasperus hold the illusion? Eliana squeezed her eyes shut, hoping it was just Riverin and Marnock. But the voice that answered him was too soft and feminine. What are you doing out here, brother?
Chapter 62. I thought I told you to stop sifting through my future. Karyne let his lips curl up as he nudged his sister's ribs. His heart pounded so hard that he felt certain Enla could sense it, even hear it. He itched to glance back through the trees to make sure Daisy couldn't be seen, but that would only draw Enla's attention more. Who were you talking to? Enla's voice held the same teasing lilt as Karyne's, her guards listening in on every word, but there was an edge of disappointment. Just Skunk. He patted the horse's flank, earning a whinny from the beast. She sighed as if he were an impertinent child. Why didn't you go to Lenda? You followed me out to the woods just to ask me that? No. There were plenty of people willing to report you leaving the city to Lenda, who then reported it to me. As her future queen, I couldn't stand by and ignore a report of possible treason. Her words came out stilted, like she was saying what she had to instead of what she meant. But since I'm here, I thought I'd ask why you couldn't follow through on your sister's one simple request. So it's treason to want to be by myself for a time? To want to get away from it all? Karyne raised his eyebrows, but Enla's face remained rigid. It is if you're found in the company of recreants. Karyne laughed, letting it ring through the forest with manufactured ease. "Do you see any recreants? It's just me and my horse." "Did you send them to the hidden pass?" Enla's voice rose, startling Karyne. "What are you talking about?" "You wouldn't be stupid enough to take them on your boat. The only other way for them to reach Mavis from here is through our family's escape route." Her mask cracked for a fraction of a second, her eyes widening in a challenge. "Are you suggesting that I'm helping recreants reach Mavis?" He asked the question slowly, as if angered by her insinuation, but his mind raced with how he might rectify their situation. Now that he'd been caught by Enla, starspeed was no longer an option. The secret pass through the mountains would be far slower than his boat, but it could still get them there before summer solstice. "You came from Islara," Enla said. "What else am I supposed to think?" "Even if I were, it would take people almost a moon longer to reach Mavis through our family's tunnel than it would by boat." He let the words hang in the air for the recreants to hear. They could do the math, make the decision for themselves. Most likely it would put them at her doorstep within days of summer solstice. Hardly enough time to devise a plan to steal back Daisy's blood. But maybe they already had a plan. "Are they under some sort of time constraint?" Enla's tone turned curious. "I'm thinking of my own impatience and laziness." Karen's hands shook, so he clenched them into fists. "Why would I want to trek 5 miles to the Phoenix's wing, then spend a day hunting for the tiny opening under the tip of the chipped feather just to spend an entire moon trekking the barren border between the desert and the coast? Especially when I could hop on starspeed and let my crew take me there in half the time. I'd be crazy to help recreants either way, but most especially across land." There. He'd given them clear directions if they were willing to use them. Even the guards glanced at each other in surprise. The whereabouts of the secret pass weren't exactly public knowledge. "You know you have to come back with me, right?" Enla's words were barely above a whisper. "Prove to Mother and Father that you're not actively working against them. If you weren't the prince, your suspicious presence out here might be enough for them to throw you in a cell." "I don't have to prove anything. They'll just keep guards stationed at my room, like always." Karyne led his horse past Enla. There was nothing more he could do for Daisy other than leave, but everything inside him resisted walking away. Besides, it's not about whether I'm actively working against them. It's about whether they're willing to work with Mavis. "Don't start this again." Enla's words came out in small huffs as she worked to catch up with him. "She practices blood magic. She used a brand on Durakin, but his is only one of many." Enla flinched, but didn't look as surprised as Karyne had hoped she might. "Father and Mother are reconsidering some of their laws. Brands aren't much different from bonds." Karyne reeled back, and his horse nearly knocked him over. He leaned in until the horse blocked them from Enla's guards. "That's not the only blood magic she does," he whispered fervently. "Not according to the recreants." "Whom you now trust?" The accusation in her voice stung more than the judgment on her face. "The recreants might be our enemy tomorrow, but today they would stand with us against Mavis if we asked." Enla opened her mouth, but Karyne cut her off before she could argue. "We're not just up against one Windren, we're up against an entire army. They even have a name. Did you know? They call themselves Zealots, and there are thousands of them, men and women who want the Windrens ruling instead of us." The horse danced nervously beside them, clearly not wanting in on their argument, but neither of them moved, Karyne's words forming a barrier between them. "Your loyalties put you in danger," she said, her gaze losing focus. "Your thoughts will get you killed." "Killed? Who will kill me?" His question came out weary. He didn't expect an answer. Her visions didn't work that way. But the answer had to be his parents, and the truth of what they valued left him exhausted. Enla reached out a hand to grip his arm. "Why did you go to Lover's Falls?" Her whisper drove deep into his soul, the pain heightened by his lingering fear over the deal half struck with the sprites. But Enla could only see possibilities in his future, choices and moral dilemmas. She shouldn't know the past. How do you— Her grip tightened on his arm. The paths for your soul are dwindling. If you'd stayed away from there, the options were endless. But now too many of them converge or end. Karyne glanced over the horse at the guards, but their stoic faces gave no indication that they'd heard. You've made yourself sick searching my future. Karyne pried her fingers from his arm, then held her hand to his face. I'm here. I'm well. Stop torturing yourself. Did you at least take Riverin with you? Hearing his name cross her lips brought shadows of memories flooding his mind. Tears and pained cries. Weeks spent sleeping outside her room to hush the name from her lips when the nightmares came. But then more recent memories replaced them. Placing bets on Aura's next antics, laughing by the fire, teasing and training Felk together. He found a way to be present. The stiff words were unfair, but they were as much as Karyne could muster in front of Enla. Her eyes fluttered shut for a moment. She nodded, then wrenched her hand away, slipping past him toward L&S. Once more her chin rose and her back straightened, making Karyne wonder if her vulnerability had been in his imagination. They made the rest of the way through the forest in silence, Karyne stewing over all the half-predictions Enla had spouted off. Past the mangrove trees, they joined a second set of guards, and they all mounted horses. When they reached the city limits, a third set of soldiers surrounded them, solidifying Karyne's suspicion that his days of freely coming and going were gone. How had he been so blind all these years? In addition to being tyrants, his parents had been forming alliances with an enemy. They likely knew about Mavis's blood magic and did nothing to stop it. They'd split up Daisy's family and exiled her to Lorvandus. His muscles tensed as he thought about what her childhood must have been like, all because of his parents. Heat flooded his starlock, matching the way his body warmed with his anger. It no longer mattered what his parents or tutors had told him about the Windrins and L&S's. He would protect Daisy with the same level of loyalty as he had for Enla. The guilty twinge in his gut twisted once more. Maybe even more if Enla continued to insist on working with Mavis. Was this what the sprites had been warning him about? He nudged his horse past Enla in the abandoned night streets, forcing her to catch up or be left behind. The guards followed too closely for Karyne's comfort, but the conversation couldn't wait. Thankfully, Enla followed. I can't tell whose side you're on, he hissed. I need you to be on my side. I am on your side. The moonlight shone off her face as it crumpled beneath the weight of her burdens. But I still answer to our parents. In some ways, I still answer to Mavis. If you'd gone to Lenda, you could have broken your bond. With that last tie severed, you would have been free. You should have listened to me. I told you everything has changed. Karyne's mouth went slack. Enla had wanted him to break his bond? The idea was both unthinkable and strangely appealing. Absolute freedom that would come with terrible suffering. He doubted it would be as painful for him as it had been for Enla, but the guilt would eat away at him. If that was what Enla had wanted, she could have been more specific with her instructions. He clamped his jaw back down, the memories of her pain flooding his mind. He wasn't sure he could put Lenda through that anyway. Besides, how would freedom from Lenda change anything? Now I don't know. She placed her hands at her temples, the crease on her brow deepening. The paths split and— She buried her face in her hands. Did you help Eliana? Or are you sending soldiers to the pass? I need to know if you sent her to her death. He couldn't stop the tremble rising in his voice. If I just helped you send her to her death. She rubbed her palms over her face, smoothing out her features and regaining her queenly serenity. But her eyes remained haunted, focused somewhere past even the stars. I already sent soldiers. I had to. If your people don't know how to wait them out, it's for the best. The alternatives are far worse. Karyne clenched his jaw. He'd get nothing more from his sister. He rode ahead, as irritated with himself as he was with Enla. By the time they returned to the palace, the faint glow of the sun's morn lit the sky. Felk had likely just been reborn. He smiled at the thought of the tiny silver baby snuggled in Daisy's arms, while she ran toward Eleness soldiers. Karyne's smile fell. He tried not to imagine being aboard Starspeed, sailing out of the harbor with Daisy and Aura and the others as his crew. It had felt so right when he and Larkos made plans, but now he no longer knew what lay ahead.
Chapter 63. A smile tugged at the edge of Aura's lips as they reached the hidden pass. They'd had to hide and wait 2 days and a night for the soldiers guarding the pass to return to Eleness. But now the gentle sounds of night life shifted to the morning ruckus of a new day, joined by Felk's childish antics. A large rock in the shape of a wing stretched out from the mountain, obscuring their view of the pass. But once they drew closer, they'd find the chipped feather and the tight opening. Then they'd have to remove packs for the horses to fit, probably blindfold them to convince them the trail led to safety. "There," Velden called, his voice more whisper than shout. He ran ahead, peering beneath the rock's edge for the promised opening. The others followed, weariness replaced by eager anticipation. It had been smart of Karyne to suggest the pass. Or maybe smart of Enla. The young queen's motives still weren't clear, and Aura hadn't been close enough to test them. Regardless, the pass would give them a chance. Aura hadn't used it since its creation, had forgotten its existence. Funny how things like that could slip someone's mind over time. It was almost noble how Karyne had given them directions, even while knowing his part of the journey had come to an end. Not that they'd needed directions. Aura could have found it in the dark of night. For now, they would be safe, thanks to Karyne's sacrifice. He was growing into the role he was meant to have, stretching the limits of what he was told to be, who he thought he was. He might not lead Aura to the arrow, but he would be back. He might even use the star bridges to make the world bigger. Aura twisted the braid on her wrist. Letting him use the star bridges for the good of the people could slow down her plans. But maybe that was for the best, for now. "It might be what you would have wanted," she murmured. "It might be what the sun wants." At that moment, the sun broke through the trees, shining down on Aura with a beam so brilliant it left her breathless. She dropped to her knees, tilting her face up to its warmth. It had been so long since she'd felt the sun's acceptance, its approval. But it had been equally long since she'd truly sought it. Prayers on behalf of others was one thing, but submission to a will that was not her own, that had become harder the longer she'd been grounded. Aura stood, taking her place at the back of the line to walk Walnut through the pass. The future was changing faster than she could keep up with, something that was both alarming and refreshing. Eliana continued to be a surprise, making choices Aura couldn't have anticipated, hadn't thought to search. For once, Aura lived in the moment, viewing the people around her as more than stones or ripples in time. They weren't just the historical figures of the future she sought. They were closer to companions and friends, something she hadn't allowed herself in ages, something she hadn't dared to find since she'd lost her last bondmate. Horses whinnied their impatience, and the sounds of packs being shuffled around echoed through the wing's small cave. Instead of readying for the pass, Eliana's gaze shifted back toward the swamps they'd left behind. What if he comes back and we're gone? He wouldn't come back, but Aura knew those words would bring the girl no comfort. He knew we'd come here. He'll know where to look. Eliana gnawed at her lip. He led Enla away to keep you safe. Aura reached out, smoothing Eliana's hair like she was a child. He's still protecting you. Don't let his sacrifice go to waste. Eliana closed her eyes, and Aura imagined the words sinking in, the truth resting deep in Eliana's pores. The younger woman joined the others, her brow still furrowed as she chewed her lip. Aura's smile returned, her heart filling with a hope she hadn't had in several generations. Some bond marks ran far deeper than the skin. I hope you enjoyed listening to the latest installment of Blood of the Stars by Karyne Norton. If you enjoy listening to this narration, you might also enjoy listening to his audio dramas at spiritblade.com or his podcast, Christian Geek Central, where he discusses movies, video games, and all things enjoyed by self-proclaimed geeks from a Christian worldview. Thanks so much for listening.